All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Jaspersoft Tech Talk number 13. So for those of you that have been following the Tech Talk program, we're changing, as of this episode, we're changing our format a little bit. They're no longer going to be recorded live, so we were getting good turnout in the audience, but weren't getting a lot of questions, and we are seeing a lot of traction on YouTube. So these will sort of go straight to video, if you will. They'll go straight to the YouTube channel, and you can pick them up there. Remember, you can subscribe to the channel. You can also get the RSS feed for the channel and pick up all the shows there. So today's topic, we have Mariano Luna back on the show. So he's a senior sales engineer out of Houston, Texas. Welcome, Mariano. The topic today is using Jaspersoft with MongoDB. So he's going to take us through some connectivity things. He's going to take us through Ireport, and he's going to take us through using an ad hoc topic. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Mariano, and I'll just sort of interrupt you along the way with questions.
Okay. So thanks, Ernesto. And as Ernesto said, we will go a little bit of a quick overview of MongoDB. I know that if you're looking at that, you're probably familiar or with the MongoDB stack and how that works. If not, it will give you a nice introduction to it. We'll go over making the right connections so we can use that from Jasper Server and from Ireport. Then we'll focus mostly on the query language that MongoDB offers. As part of the NoSQL or big data stack, MongoDB is pretty nice because it has a very rich query language that you can use. And that allows you to produce pretty nice reports and also leverage the ad hoc functionality of Jasper pretty well. And then, of course, we'll move into the product, and I will show you that in Ireport and also using an ad hoc topic so you can create your own queries directly on the server. So first step, what is MongoDB? Okay, the MongoDB database, it's an open source document database. It's pretty interesting in the way that they have created the whole stack because it's oriented to the developers. So it's a document-oriented storage. What you store in the database are JSON documents. You have a schemaless store, so there are no table definitions. You can change the schema as you go, which for developers is actually something really neat. For reporting, you will have to be careful about that and take into consideration those things. But for that matter, the idea of having a rich query language, you can leverage that to be able to get all the information you need from that type of storage. You have support for indexes like any standard database. You have the capability of using MapReduce jobs. If you're familiar with the MongoDB stack, it's works very tightly with JavaScript. So you will do those MapReduces with JavaScript functions. So the idea of how you query that from Jasper has a query executor for Mongo. The way we decided to implement this was actually using the same JSON-style declarative language that Mongo uses to store the documents. Since Mongo uses kind of query by example, where your find queries, you put the type of document that you want to retrieve from the collection, it's very simple to understand and has a direct relationship to what you will do in the Mongo shell to do queries there. You have two main types of supported queries. One is API-driven queries. Those are the same one that you will use from your application, and if you're using the Mongo driver from Java, Python, or PHP or any other language, you'll see it's very similar to that. And the other ones are command-driven queries. And the good thing of command-driven queries is that they will allow you to use the MongoDB aggregation framework and also the MapReduce functionality.
Mariano, I'll stop you there. So there's something kind of interesting about MongoDB. So it's a NoSQL data source, and there's no schema involved, meaning that one row in the database might look different than another row in the database. And so somebody asked me once, what, I mean, so how does Jaspersoft deal with this unstructured data? And it's a very simple kind of answer. Is we, when it comes to reporting, you want to count things or you want to show things that are in columns and rows. And so the way, I guess what I'm getting at is if one row is different from the next, there's not a lot of useful things you can do with it. And so that's why we use this search-driven query. So let's say you have one row that says apple, the next row that says spaceships, the next row that says bananas. If you find fruit, I guess, then you just disregard the fact that bananas exists. So that's something important to remember, because just because it's special here with a relational database, you always have a schema. All of your rows will look the same. They don't necessarily have to look the same here, so it's search is the way we get about that.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because there are a lot of elements in the query language from Mongo that will allow you to overcome that thing, and one of them is the aggregation framework. So from the aggregation framework, for those that are familiar with Mongo, you can pipeline a set of processes on the query, so the output that you get is actually what you're looking for in the database. And if you're familiar with the MongoDB stack, and you will see that when you're working with a collection, which will be the equivalent of a table, you can do, let's say, I will create a new collection called test, and I can insert a document there directly. And my document can be something simple as you know, it's a key value store, so I can insert my name there, get that done, and then do a simple find. And what happens here is that having that document there doesn't mean that I can go in and insert the next one and call just that key fruit, and I'm not a fruit, so I can move it to apple, and my database has a complete different schema from one row to the other. Being schemaless on Mongo doesn't mean that all your records will be completely different, because it will not make sense even to your application. You do have a logic and you do schema design in MongoDB. So when you're creating your application, you will have certain type of schema. The good thing about Mongo is that you can change the schema over time without affecting without having to do an alter table or changing the database or anything. So if from the reporting side, you have to take that into consideration. If you have changed the schema, certain queries will work on the historical data, while other ones will work only on the newer data from the schema change on. And if you have something that is completely different, you have to figure out in your query, like Ernesto said, if I'm doing a find here for a name, of course, the schema of what I get will be exactly the same. And if I insert other names, I can actually find those directly and receive always the same schema. And you will see there in the query examples that I have that there are ways to select which fields from each document you want to retrieve into your reporting environment.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about connectivity, and I'll talk about Jasper Server. And Ireport is exactly the same thing. It's very simple actually to create a connection to a MongoDB data source. You just, there is an option when you create data sources on the server and also in Ireport, which is for MongoDB. The connection URL, it's uses the MongoDB colon as a protocol, and you have just server port and which collection you're connecting to. As you know, there are no joins in Mongo, so there's actually no way to build domains on top of these. It's part of the architecture of MongoDB as a database. The way that you can join information is by creating a collection, and one of the key value pairs that you have there, it will be either another document or another collection. And for reporting purposes, you can use unwind or anything else, or treat that as precisely as a collection to access the elements there. So connection settings are pretty straightforward. So it's, put up your server port and collection name and save that in. We do support the authentication mechanism of Mongo, so if you have that set up, you can set the username and password there to connect to your server. And that will allow you to run queries directly through it.
Question, Marianne. Do you remember when we introduced MongoDB into the product?
Mongo was introduced on the commercial product on 4.7. It was available before that as a community project, so we did have that capability of adding the connector on 4.5 and previous versions. I don't know how far down was the connector made, but
yeah, it must be something like 4.2, something along those lines. So if you're on 4.2 or 4.5, then you'll have to download this separately. And as of 4.7, you have it in the product and in Ireport as well.
And in Ireport as well. And you can download that from the community site, the MongoDB connector, and install that on a 4.2 or 4.5 server. And you will see the option appear on your create database, so you can build your queries from there. Okay, so going a little bit into how we implement the query language. And the first way of doing queries are what I call before the API-driven queries. So these are queries that go directly to the MongoDB driver and are pretty straightforward. And as you can see, we use the JSON style format for that. The way that the query is built is collection name, which is the only mandatory parameter. And then you have options to add a find query, find fields to specify specific fields that you want to retrieve from your collection instead of everything. A sort option, so you can get that collection sorted out in the Mongo. You have a map reduce option that you can use from here, which is part of the driver, and it will go directly the same way that the driver uses map reduce jobs. And of course, limits and rows to process if you want to limit the output of the collection and get the top 5 or the top X amount of elements. And rows to process actually works with the map reduce to be able to control how many rows you want to process on the job itself. And these queries are very similar. I have a couple of examples going forward to what we did on the Mongo shell. So instead of doing db.collectionName.find, in Jasper you will create a JSON document with collection name, the name of your collection, find query, and your find query. So actually this query that I did here will move into Jasper into collection name test, which is my collection name here, and find query and the JSON document name and Ernesto to pick actually that particular field or the fields that match that query itself. The other option that we have that it's really powerful because that's where you can actually leverage everything that you have from the MongoDB backend. It's using the run command query. And the run command allows you to run either MapReduce jobs directly or use the aggregation framework. So the two options that you have there is just the dry run command one, and you'll see the examples there with a MapReduce function and rows to process. And then the use of the internal Mongo aggregation framework that I think that it came in Mongo 2.1 initially. So if you're using an old version of Mongo, the only option you have is the top one. But if you are on the latest versions, you can use the aggregate functions and put your pipeline there. And that pipeline is what I talked about before. It's the set of commands that you want to run through the aggregation framework to get the result that you want. So a little bit of examples, and I show you one already, but oops, sorry, that was me.
You showed us everything now.
Yep, thank you. So a minimal query, and you can use this to create your report, is just bring me the whole collection, and that's all it needs. The collection name is the only required argument in a MongoDB query. So in this case, I'm bringing the whole table to the report, the accounts collections or the accounts table, and you will see that in Ireport, Ireport will actually run through the collection to, I think the standard is 30 or 40 rows, to pick up the schema that you have and map the types of objects that you have in your collection to the Java type that Ireport will use. So if you have a date there, or if you have a string or a nested document which will be passed in to Jasper as a collection object, as a Java collection object. And of course you can use parameters as you use in SQL. So let's say that from the collection accounts, I want to get everything that is greater than a parameter, which is my start date. I can use that exactly the same way that I inject those parameters, those Jasper reports parameters into SQL. So there's a link at the end, and you can keep that one in your bookmarks that gives you kind of a quick rundown on all the options you have in the find query. As you know, we keep the same format and structure that Mongo uses, so $GT will be greater than or equal, or LT will be less than or equal, and you can do comparison queries that way and get the information you need. And of course, the $regex will do a regular expression search on your text in the name field in this case. So the good takeaways here is that you can use parameters in Ireport. You can use those parameters and create drill downs. You can use those parameters to actually drive the report information, and any parameter type that we support is actually supported into the MongoDB query language. So you can use multiple select and do an in option in Mongo. So that's where this type of NoSQL, it's really interesting because you have almost all the power you get from a SQL data source in terms of querying data and retrieving the information you need.
Do you know specifically what isn't supported in Mongo that you can do in SQL?
Well, for starters, joins. No way to join anything. So you act only in one collection. That's one of the main things that you have no support for it. You can do grouping by using the aggregation framework, so you can add, and I have an example of that. You can do a group and add, let's say, the score of the students or any element that you have from there. You can select which fields you want to output. You can sort the information in different ways. So there's mostly everything it's possible except for joining. And of course, there are no case statements in Mongo, but you can do something similar with either a MapReduce job or, yeah, probably the only way would be a MapReduce job to do a case type of statement. you will have in SQL.
Fair enough, fair enough. And of course you can always leverage the power of Jasper reports for some of the missing things.
Yes.
But I guess maybe my point of discussion then is why do you know of some use cases where reporting directly from MongoDB makes sense versus ETL to build, a traditional data warehouse? And this might be a hard question.
That's a tough question because, as always, it depends on the data that is stored there and the implementation. But actually going against Mongo is not bad. The only issue you may have is that, as always, reporting is pretty heavy on the back end. So if you have a very small Mongo instance, you are going against your operational database, and that's bad in Mongo and in SQL. So that's one of the things that you have to consider. The good thing about Mongo is that it's really easy to scale up, and by being easy to scale and have a ton of servers actually answering your query is really good for production, but you have to be really careful when you're reporting on that, because if you send a historical query to a Mongo cluster, you will be hitting all the servers at the same time if you have not set up that correctly. And that will be a performance hit on your production database. So I don't know if that answers your questions or poses new ones, but that's my take on it, Ernesto.
Yeah, sure. And I guess, I mean, it was kind of a loaded question in a way. But what I normally would advise is, if you need the data straight away, like maybe you need to have data that's up to the minute, or you can't wait for an ETL job to finish, maybe it makes sense to go directly against the operational store. Another possibility is you actually don't have to choose one or the other. It's not so black and white. You can actually maybe do some ETL for your aggregate data and then go directly to the source data for the detail. So yes, different possibilities, I guess, within Jaspersoft. And yeah, you're right in saying that there is no answer. It's not, there's not an easy guide that says, oh, do this or do that. It all depends on architecture, types of queries, number of users, lots of different parameters.
Yeah, and the amount of data. I had a couple of projects that they were doing actually a really interesting thing. They were actually aggregating the data for reporting in Mongo itself. So the Mongo instance that they were accessing for reporting was actually like a data warehouse, was just for reporting. So aggregations were done through MapReduce job that run nightly. So there's also a very hybrid approach where you do have certain type of ELT, let's say, transformations inside the database running, and you're not going against your operational MongoDB, but a reporting MongoDB. So there's never an easy answer to that question.
I agree.
Okay. So going into again into a little bit of the example queries, and this is where when Ernesto brought up the question, okay, what happens if your schema is different, if you have things that are not the same throughout the collection itself? Well, the find fields option allows you to pick and choose which fields from your full collection you want to retrieve for that particular report. And that can help you standardize the schema on the collection you have. So in that case, the return of this query will be only name, phone, office, and billing address. And it will, of course, will be sorted by country descending and by city ascending. So you have this capability. So and if this account collection has nested documents, a lot of extra information that it's completely schemaless, and it depends on which account we're talking about. If you want to report on certain elements that are familiar throughout the collection, you can use the find fields to pick those up, and everything that doesn't match that criteria will not be sent to the result set. And last but not least, and this is probably the most interesting part of running queries from Mongo, and it's the aggregation framework. I talked a little bit about this, and this is the way you do grouping in Mongo. So let's say in this case we have a ZIP database with each zip code by state and the population number for each one of the zip codes. In standard SQL, you will do a select state, sum population, and group by state, and you will be happy with that and get your result set. Well, the good thing is that in Mongo you can do the same thing. It doesn't look the same, but it's a lot more powerful than the group by. So this is a very simple pipeline in the aggregation, and what I'm doing is I'm calling the ZIPs table or collection, and I'm pushing all that collection through this pipeline. And that pipeline actually groups everything by state and spits out as population the sum of the pop field. So in my collection I have ZIPs collection, I have a state key value pair and a pop value pair. And what I'm doing here is actually grouping all the zip codes by state and adding up the population, sorting that out, and spitting that out for reporting. There's a really good explanation on the Mongo documentation on how this framework works. You can pipeline all sorts of things, so you can do unwinds to expand documents that you have nested in your collection and then aggregate those in and then do another aggregation on top of that. So it's a really powerful framework that you can use to analyze your data, and you can run those queries directly from the reporting environment to get your data and report on it.
And just to reiterate, I think something you said earlier, this is using the aggregation framework which was introduced in MongoDB 2.2. So if you're using MongoDB 2.0, I think what you have to do is write a MapReduce job.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So the query looks a lot more difficult than this. So if you're on an old version, get to a new version.
Exactly. And if you see, I have a couple of links at the end of the presentation, and you will see a couple of examples there of MapReduce jobs in Mongo. So that you will see that this same query, which is pretty easy to read once you get the idea of how the aggregation framework works, in a MapReduce job, it's a little bit more complicated. So let me show you. I think I have a query here. So this is how MapReduce will look like. So as you see, you send the JavaScript reduce function, you send your finalize function. So it's a little bit more convoluted that using the aggregation framework. And this is just to count, as you see, scores for a collection. So it's better to be on the 2.2 plus versions of Mongo. They did a really good job with this framework. Okay, so let's get into Jasper, and we will see from there the options you have. So one of the things, I will show you first the output of what I have done, and then we'll see how these reports were created, if I get my credentials right. So the first thing that we're going to check is it's a pretty small collection that I have, that it does actually surveys. So what I have in my database is just a collection of surveys that are stored in a MongoDB data store. And what I'm doing here is I'm just mainly using a lot of the Jasper options of grouping at the report level instead of sending that to the query, and just getting some stats of how those questions were answered. So as you can see, I have my question name, how many people answer in different ways, agree, neither agree or disagree, or stormy agree. And as you can see, I'm leveraging actually the schema-less options of Mongo, because each one of my questions has different type of answers. And in my collection, I don't have all of them. I don't have one for each one. It's actually on a nested document, and depending on the question, if I have no people that actually answer agree or disagree, I won't have that in the collection. So that's one of the things. Unwinding that will help you out to get that in a Java object that you can parse and work around, or you can use a full aggregate query and receive the data as you need it. So as you can see, it's very simple. I'm just going through my collection, getting the information, and what I did here that is interesting is I have all the raw data on that Mongo collection. So what I can do is say, okay, for these people that actually have answered that they do agree on getting the help they needed, how did they answer the rest of the survey? So I created a simple drill down here, and I'm passing that to another report. And as you see, now my whole universe is the people that did agree to get the help. And now I'm finding that, okay, there are very different answers for the rest of the questions. So even though they agree that they got the help, they are kind of in the middle, in between, if they can talk to a staff member, if they were being bullied, or if they feel safe. So you have that capability of building drill downs or using parameters in your reports directly from a MongoDB data store, as you will do with a standard SQL type of report. So
that's a really nice example.
Thank you. So let's check this one out and see how we actually build those. So as I said before, from Ireport, you do have the option of building connections to MongoDB. So let me I have everything on my other screen, sorry. So you can create a MongoDB connection. The URI is exactly the same as you can use on Jasper server. I have these on a cloud server, and I have another connection that goes to my local host. So depending on where your server is, it's just server port and the collection name. And then on the query field, you have to use the query language. You have to tell Ireport that you're using MongoDB query language. And here's the query I'm using. So as you can see, I'm getting, let me switch the database so we can go and see the data. There you go. So I'm picking my collection name, I'm sorting that for ascending on question and answer, and I'm doing a find query with a parameter that I have in my report that it's just the customer name. Okay, so I get the mappings of my objects. So as you see, this collection has an object ID in the ID field. So that's a standard BSON object ID that Mongo will add if you have not declared a primary key or a underscore ID field. And they'll receive everything as string, and one of the fields is actually a date. And just to give you an idea, this is how the collection looks like once we have that. So you do have that beautiful hash for the ID. And as you can see, it's very similar to what you can do with SQL. Sorry, Ernesto, I think you had something there.
Oh no, just a quick thing on types. So it looks like when you put in your query, we got back a list of field names with types. And how did you get the date? Is that just a matter of inserting a date and then we detect it as a date, or did you specify somewhere?
No, actually, it's just MongoDB has types in its data store. So there's a date type, but there's an integer type, and all that. So they are mapped into its proper Java types. You can actually, as always, change that if it's not the right type. As you see, let's get my query again. If I just do a hope this works. I think that I had a field name when. So let's only pick the when field, and that will actually, if I got it right. I don't know if I need the quotes for this or not. Okay. Supposedly it should have brought only my field there. But it actually will map those to the proper data type based on what the BSON object is stored as. So you don't have to change anything if you store the data as a date in Mongo. If you didn't, you'll have to operate with that because the date will come in a string and not in a date format. Okay?
Okay, makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And you can use the standard Jasper elements to manipulate that string and get a proper date. And as you can see, when is a proper date, Java till date option. And this is, here you see actually how the data is stored in my collection. And as you see, I'm not doing any aggregation in the query itself. I'm doing all that at the report level. So what I have in my report is actually a set of groups that it's grouping all the results set by questions, and another group that is grouping the answers all together. And I use variables to calculate those counts, all at the report level. So this could have been done directly by getting those things from an aggregated query using the aggregation framework or a MapReduce job. But I decided to do everything in the report. And I decided to do it that way because since I want to do a drill down on those things, I want to specify some particular elements that I want to pass. And one of those is actually the proper which IDs actually represent the answers on each one, so I can pass that to my drill down report and get all the answers from those particular people that answer yes or no for a particular question set. So if you look at my hyperlink on the chart data, you will see that the parameter I'm passing to that is this variable subs2, which is just the collection of the subscriber IDs that have answered to yes or no to that particular question. And this is actually in the chart itself as a part of the link of that slice of the pie. Okay, and on the other report, the only thing I do is just receive that parameter, subscriber IDs, and I use that in my query. You see that the report is basically the same thing because I'm going through the collection again, but now in my query I'm specifying in the find query not only the customer that got passed in, but also which subscriber IDs answer to that question. And I'm using the clause there for the Mongo query language. So be careful. One thing that you have to be careful here, Mongo uses $signs to the operators for queries. So you have $in, $greater than or less than, and so on. And we also use the $sign for the P and X parameters. So this is actually a Jasper parameter that I'm passing in, and this is just a MongoDB operator that I'm using on the subscriber field.
Sorry, is that subscriber field a collection?
No, in this case I didn't pass a pure collection. I pass a comma delimited files. That's why I'm using the p back.
Okay. Would that actually work, you think, if subscriber ID's parameter was a collection? I haven't tried it. I'm curious.
I haven't tried that one. If it's a collection, I think that you will need. You know what? I haven't tried it. I have to test that out.
Yeah, sounds like a question for Matt.
Yes, exactly. Sounds like a really good question. If I pass a pure collection, a Java collection there, if I can use the in parameter there, we can actually. I think I have there are a couple of example queries with that, and in the page that I have at the end, and we'll see it. But I'm pretty sure that you can pass a pure collection there because he doesn't have the band in his example query. But it's always good to test. So that's just basically what we saw in those two reports, how I created those. And as you see from the Ireport side, it's not that different from what you will do from a standard SQL-driven report. You have a query, you have a data set, you operate with that, you can use report groups, you can use aggregation in variables, and doing counts or having those operations done on the result set as the report gets executed. Okay, so all this is it's really nice, and it allows you to use Ireport and to use the server to schedule those reports, use parameters and everything like input controls, and that's really nice. But the good thing about Mongo is that you can definitely use topics to build ad hoc result sets. So the ad hoc reporting on Jasper, as you know, can be driven by domains which are relational only. But any of the connectors we have, not only MongoDB, but any connector that Jasper has in terms of big data or data stores, allows you to build topics. And these topics are just report units. So if I were to pick up I think I have it right here, the student scores for Mongo, which uses a collection I have with scores from students in different tests and different states. If I were to grab that particular report and load it into Ireport, it's just a JRXML. And you will see that I'm doing a very simple query there. I'm not playing a lot with my data. So since I want to use this on ad hoc, the only thing I'm doing is just bringing the whole collection in. Okay? So that's all I need. And then here you can see again, Ernesto, that if you have integers or doubles, will actually be picked as that from Jasper, depending on the JSON type of the document it's stored in the Mongo store.
Hold on, I'm going to stop you there because one of the questions is related to this. Your ID there, the first field, _ID, it tends to come back as an org.bson.types.object_ID. Did you manually change it to a double to make this work?
No, this collection was actually a double.
Oh, okay. So for those of you that are trying to do what Mariano's doing, most collections, it's going to be this strange org.bson. And when you preview, if you preview the report in Ireport, it works perfectly well. Unfortunately, if you try to deploy this as a topic, it would break because we don't know what to do within org.bson.types_object_ID.
Yeah.
So you need to either delete the field or you need to change its type to a string before you deploy it.
If you change the type to a string, you will get the string of the actual value, the string value of that ID. That will be a hash. Or you can just, if you're going to be using that in ad hoc, And that ID is actually the BSON object. It doesn't have a lot of use in the ad hoc environment, so you can just go ahead and delete the field itself and deploy this into the ad hoc environment.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's probably useless to most people in the context of ad hoc.
Yeah. In this case, it's an actual numerical ID, so you may have something to do. I could have deleted that one. I didn't do it, but it will work exactly the same. So it's just a numerical ID there. And if you want to see how this collection looks like from here, we can actually preview that and get an idea. So I have just a numeric. Look at that. The numeric ID is actually a double value, as is stored in MongoDB. And for my case, it doesn't make any sense. So I do have a lot of, it's a very flat store. I have the grades of each student, full name altogether, the last name and name separated, a range, school district, the score that they have, the score type, the state, and the student ID of each one of them. So as you can see, each one of the students have more than one test score, depending if it's an exam, homework, or quiz. And we will use this query straight as it comes from the ad hoc interface to do some analysis on that. So again,
some of those names on those test scores looked familiar, Mariano.
Oh yes, they were random.
They look like coworkers.
Yes, they may be.
All right. Anyways.
Yeah. So that's one of the good things of Mongo. If you haven't used it, actually that collection that I have for scores is generated by a JavaScript function. So the way I did this is to get something decent that I can use in ad hoc and be able to do some analysis into it. It was to just create a simple JavaScript function that inserts everything, and you can run that function from the from the Mongo object. So if somebody's interested in that, they can leave a comment there, and I can give you the JavaScript function that just randomizes a set of names and last names and give you the score value for each student.
Very nice.
Okay, so again, we go to the ad hoc interface, and as you know, this is a feature of the professional and enterprise edition of Jasper. I'm using MongoDB as a topic, as I say, because I cannot build a domain based on that yet. So domains are still available for relational data sources, but that doesn't mean that I cannot use ad hoc. And one thing that is interesting, and we'll see that when I start here. So when you're building a domain in Ireport, well, it's interesting because you do have certain properties. As you saw in the query, my fields names are not that great to show to the end user, okay? So you can actually have set properties on those field names, and that property is called ad hoc display, and you can put a string there, and that's what it will be shown to the end user from the ad hoc UI. So if you want to make this a little bit more human readable and don't have something like score underscore type, you can just change that to any string directly from the Ireport properties. And if you're doing that in XML, you just add the property there to the topic. So as you can see, when I go into the ad hoc interface, I don't have anything that looks database-like. I have more things that are human readable and allow me to say, okay, let's bring the student ID. Okay, that's not very interesting. Let's bring test scores. And okay, looking at the sum of the test score doesn't make a lot of sense, but the average actually does make sense. And as you can see, I can get the overall average of all my students in my collection, which is 7295, not that great of my team. And I can use everything that we have in ad hoc. So if we have version 5, where we have this neat idea of data sliders, I could, let's say, grab the state where the school is located and open those scores by state. And don't ask me what happened to Florida because I really don't know. These guys are not that good, but and you can see actually the average of all the students that have taken tests on each one and how they go in terms of the average score for each state. And you can go even farther if you want and say, okay, let's break this down by test type to see how they are going either in homeworks or each one of them. So for probably it's nicer to put this on stack series. So as you can see, if we grab, I don't know, Rhode Island, for example, quizzes were 72, well, 71.9, actually very similar ones. Okay, did I tell you that I generated this with a JavaScript query? That's what you get.
Well, the random function works, except for...
Yeah, I actually use a random, not so random function, so they should be all near each one. So I got at least certain variation between the states that you can show here. So this idea can work on a chart or also in a crosstab. So you have those capabilities, and then I don't know, break each state in school district if you want, and have those values all set. So this is actually really nice. You're leveraging your MongoDB backend, the in-memory analysis from Jasper. You can actually filter things out here and say, okay, how did it went for all the students? I have Smith as the last name, and just filter those out. And I bet I have Smiths in all my states. And you're able to generate that from the ad hoc UI. Okay. So that's one of the good things about using topics, is that you can tailor those queries. And the other thing that is important is that you can have parameters on those queries. So a topic can have a parameter that is set. So when you access the topic, this will actually light up and you will be able to change the input values. So if you're going against a very large MongoDB collection, you can set parameters of date or ranges of, in this case, I don't know, a particular state or whatever, and have that in as a pre-filter of your topic directly.
Right, and that's going to affect the query.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the values are going to be loaded in memory. So that's something to understand between these types of topics and domains, is that the entire data set's loaded into memory. Here,
yes.
Domains, you are passing through SQL.
Yeah, and domains can do what's called push down queries, so they can throw the aggregations down to the underlying data store. In this case, as you see, I have this enabled so you can see the query I'm sending. I'm just getting the full collection here, loading all that into memory and operating with that information directly from here. So I don't have that capability with topics. That's why it's important to filter those. I think that this collection let me.
That's interesting looking.
So if you see, this is actually the collection I'm using. So I have loaded 195,000 records all into memory to do this. So you have to be careful about that, and pre-filtering the topics, it's pretty important. Yeah, that's actually a nice looking job.
Yeah. One thing that I was playing around with, this is a little bit off topic, but in I think version 5, you can actually see how much memory like 200,000 records takes, and it's not as much as I thought. It's actually just like half a megabyte or something.
Yeah, and actually
it depends on how it's stored and all that.
Yes, and that's interesting that you brought that up. And let's see how this one, because that's part of the columnar memory data store on version 5. So there is compression being made on the memory. When you're loading this up, you're not loading, and let's see, I have quite a few queries here.
I think they're sorted by age. So it should be like one of the first. Well, there's one.
Yeah, age and use, I think. How often are you using them?
Oh,
I
right.
haven't been using my test scores so much. So as you see, it's 8.5, 8.05, and this is in megabytes. Okay.
Yeah, so that's really not bad because if you
It's or 200,000 records for the full data set, all the documents that I have and all the elements in each document. And as you can see from the SQL queries, a lot of them are pretty small.
Anyways, that was off topic.
Yeah.
But anyways, interesting new feature of 4.5.0, I believe.
Yeah. And it's you can leverage really big data sets in memory with version 5, so that can scale up pretty well as long as you have memory in the server to handle that.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's take just a couple of questions that we have that I basically just picked up off of the community site.
Okay.
One of them
I'll put these
is
links on the screen while you ask.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know if you want to introduce those or anything like
Yeah,
that.
just a quick introduction. The first two are actually from MongoDB. They have really good documentation. You can get all that from there, how to build queries and everything. I think this is probably the most important page that you want to look at. It's on our community site. It has a really good explanation of the MongoDB query language from Jaspers and, of course, our documentation. So that's I think it's important for you guys to have these available, and we'll post those with the slide on the Tech Talk page so you can access them.
All right. I'll point out one last resource, which is sort of the father behind all this, Matt Dahlman.
Oh, yes.
And he works with another team to deliver this to you, but he keeps a blog called Right Outer Join, and so he's actually got some kind of getting started information on his blog, and he's very active on it. So I would add that, but you can just search Right Outer Join MongoDB, and you'll find it.
And he's the one actually that made the initial page of this MongoDB query language. I did some examples and added those. And as you can see, it's pretty comprehensive in how to query Mongo from Jasper. And you have all sorts of examples and sets of example queries that you can use. And this is how a MapReduce job looks like, as you can see. So that's the same aggregation query for population using a MapReduce, and then here using the aggregation framework. Okay, and I think his link is down here somewhere.
Maybe MongoDB resources.
Yes.
At the very bottom, and then.
No, this is another one in our page. So I'll add the link to the Mongo topics that Matt has into this page, so our friends can access that directly from there.
Okay, very good. All right, so last couple minutes, we'll just switch to a couple of questions. Jasper ETL support. Basically, I can take this one. It's just asking how to connect to MongoDB from Jaspersoft ETL. So we currently ship Jaspersoft ETL version 5.1.2, and we don't include a MongoDB connector there. There is a community connector that you can just search for on Talon Forge. I've installed it. I've tried it for reading data. I didn't try it for writing data. Relatively easy to get started with that one. In future versions, version 5.2 I believe is the next shipping version, Talon actually includes that by default, And so out of the box, you're going to have a MongoDB connector in Jaspersoft ETL. And then you can do all the wonderful things you can do with ETL as well. So then you'll have the option of going either directly against MongoDB, like Mariano showed you, or taking it into a traditional data warehouse with Jaspersoft ETL, or some sort of a hybrid where some reports connect directly and some reports go through a data warehouse. Another question that was in the forums was around text searching. So in MongoDB 2.4 we introduced, or they introduced, Tengen introduced text searching and collections. Do you know, Mariano, I don't know the answer to this one, do you know if it's available, something you could use from Ireport?
Actually, if it's it should be available if the driver, if the Java driver that Tengen added supports it. You should be able to use the API query for that. For example, when they added the aggregation framework, there was no change in Jasper to support that.
Okay. We just passed through the commands to the driver.
So if it's the Java driver, we can do it from the query language. The only thing we did was that JSON wrapper to set the parameters of the Java driver. So it's easier to write queries, but much more similar to what you would write on the Mongo shell. So think of the query executor for Jaspersoft. It's very similar to what Mongo has in the Mongo shell with their JavaScript object notation. So that's kind of the idea. So it may be supported. I haven't tested, I don't know, but if the Java driver supports it, it should be there.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, so that was the last question. So Mariano, thanks a lot for coming on, and thanks a lot for your great demonstration today.
No, you're welcome.
All right, everybody. So we'll see you for Tech Talk number 14. We'll have the new topics out very soon. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.